It's all about alleged victim Jane's testimony today in the Sean Diddy Combs trial. Back on the stand, she testified about voyeuristic sex and drugs, audio recordings were played, texts were read. What were the main points of her testimony, though? How does it potentially fit into the prosecution's case? And how was the jury reacting to her? Law&Crime's in-court reporter Elizabeth Millner is back with us to break it all down. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, so you heard me lay it all out there. Jane back on the stand today in Sean Diddy Combs' criminal trial out of New York. Federal court testified about how Combs allegedly coerced her into multiple sexual episodes with other men, right? Sex trafficking, transporting sex workers and her for purposes of prostitution, another charge. Maybe fits into racketeering conspiracy, the idea that Combs engaged in a pattern of abuse and sexual exploitation of women using his businesses and resources and staff to essentially create a criminal enterprise that was engaged in all sorts of crimes. So what were the highlights of her testimony? Did she help prove any of these charges? Maybe, I don't know, maybe not the best witness for the prosecution. You know, she claims she was in a relationship with him right until his arrest. So, with all that in mind, I want to bring on Law&Crime's in-court reporter Elizabeth Millner, who is going to give us a play-by-play on the biggest moments that happened today. Elizabeth, it's great to see you. Now, first of all, before we even talk about her testimony, she is testifying under a pseudonym, Jane, that's not her real name. The courtroom sketches are actually blurring her face. But I understand in the middle of court today, it came out that people are trying to find out who she is?
And I think starting back when Mia was testifying, as far as people who have been online trying to figure out who these witnesses are. And in Jane's case specifically, her lawyer went up there and kind of gave an argument to the judge just about YouTube and Instagram accounts that have been either trying to identify Jane or are just flat out just saying her name on the internet. And then Jane's attorney had said that no one in the courtroom did it, but as far as her concern, she seemed very concerned about this as far as people trying to find out who she is, people talking about who she is, and understandably there are kind of identifiable traits inside the transcripts, inside where people might be able to kind of draw the connection. But as far as just the entire judge's order in the first place, the order is that you cannot talk about this particular witness. Now, as far as what the judge can do to kind of ramify maybe the damage that has been done, he's looking into it, and I believe that Jane's defense attorney is going to submit a letter just kind of going more in depth about it. But you always have to kind of wonder to yourself, Jesse, how much can the judge do? For example, if somebody is commenting on it, they live in Ohio or Oklahoma or just some other area that's not in New York City, just how much of a reach can a judge's order really do in this particular case? And I think it's one of the problems that is coming up in a trial this big with this very high profile and just the impact that it could have.
I think the main concern is if somebody in that courtroom is leaking information. That is the number one concern, and hopefully that is not the case. The judge can definitely do something about that. Okay, I want to get back into her testimony. And look, one of the individual charges that Sean Combs faces is sex trafficking with respect to Jane. Force, fraud, coercion. What were some of the examples that you saw that would support, I don't know if necessarily force, but maybe fraud or coercion for the prosecution's case? Because there was a lot of information today, and I actually was trying to pick out pieces that might support the prosecution's case, and then we could talk about maybe some weaknesses. But what were parts that you think support the prosecution's case that this was sex trafficking?
Well, I think as far as the prosecution goes, I think they're really kind of honing in that it's sex trafficking by fraud specifically. So, for example, if Jane is making text messages or sending text messages or writing even voice notes to herself or writing them out in her phone, because we all know we have that iPhone notes app inside our phone, that she's explaining that Diddy, or Sean as she refers to him while on the stand, was a pathological liar, that he would lie to her about things as far as she was under the impression that the two would be just spending time together. And then what would turn out was that they would end up having these hotel nights or debauchery nights or freak offs just for not even like an hour or two, not even for 30 minutes, nothing like that. For the lowest, I think, amount she had said was 12 hours and the longest going for 3.5 days. And so I think the prosecution is really trying to hone in that this wasn't sex trafficking necessarily by force or coercion, but more specifically under fraud. And under one of the arguments that they were making towards the end of the day, they did kind of verify that they believe that this is sex trafficking by fraud. And so there are other examples too that could possibly go into maybe force or coercion, that being that Jane had always wanted these escorts, or the entertainers as she calls them, while on the witness stand, to wear condoms, and that Diddy didn't necessarily like that. He preferred that these men would just be doing it unprotected in a sense. And there were times where Jane did seem apprehensive about doing these freak-offs or hotel nights or debauchery nights with certain escorts. So there was one time where she said that one man was brought in and that she found him kind of unattractive and was kind of repulsed by him. He was sweating all over her. She just, again, wasn't attracted to him, and she wanted kind of Diddy to like kick him out, and she didn't want to do this. But instead of him just leaving, I mean, he did end up leaving, but then another man was brought. So it seemed like, I think what they were trying to go for is that even if she didn't want to do it, even if she wasn't attracted to or didn't want to have sex with these particular men or escorts, that instead of just dismissing this person, just ending the night just there, it would just continue on and on, or he would just get somebody else to do it. She explained that she would cry after hotel night. She said one time she thought that she and Diddy were just doing a date night. This was the beginning of their relationship, and then they did an 18-hour hotel night. And at the end, Diddy said that he had to leave, and she said that I just didn't want him to leave me like that, especially after doing this very long sex session, which she also referred to as performances, that she would just be performing because she loved him and that she just wanted to make him happy. And then she gets kind of emotional and chokes up a little bit on the witness stand, where she was like, I didn't want him to leave me like that alone. I was so high that night. It was just a bad memory. And again, she's kind of crying about this while on the stand. And so Jane said that she cried even in front of Diddy at the Waldorf Hotel in Beverly Hills. And Diddy looked at her and was like, are you crying? And Jane explained that this was in a disgusted face that he was making. She said that there was another time where she had cried after a hotel night. She said she was in the shower with Diddy and she felt herself kind of blacking out. She said that they were at his house. Next thing you know, we were at a hotel. I was high. I embraced his butler. Then I was having sex with Paul, and Paul is an escort. And that Sean, aka Diddy, was telling her to stop crying because he was high and just didn't enjoy that. And so it seemed like from Jane's point of view that she really, kind of similar to Cassie, just continued to do drugs and rarely did these freak off sessions or hotel nights sober. She recalled maybe 2 instances of starting them at least sober, and then because she was just kind of disgusted with herself and disgusted just with the whole process of it, she ended up taking a pill, and that pill likely being an ecstasy pill. And so it seemed like maybe the government does have that kind of working for them as far as going to count 4 specifically of sex trafficking pertaining to victim 2 or Jane. And so it seems like those are kind of the arguments that we've learned so far. We still have a whole nother day of direct, so I'm sure we'll learn a lot more soon.
By the way, we plan to continue to providing you this Diddy coverage. We're going to give you recaps. We're going to break down these legal issues that happen almost every day in court. And one of the reasons we can do this and bring you this content is because we get amazing support from our incredible partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan. This is America's largest injury law firm. And honestly, they have an incredible track record. In the past few months, Morgan & Morgan secured a $9.3 million verdict for a car crash victim in Florida, a $5.6 million verdict for another car accident victim in Atlanta, and not to mention $1.8 million in Kentucky after insurance offered them just $5,000 in that case. And even if you think your case isn't worth millions of dollars, why not just start a claim and fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan, they make it so simple. You can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks, and everything from signing contracts to uploading documents to talking to your legal team, it can all be done through the phone. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC sidebar. Yeah, and I was reading that she got sick. She was tired, like she would testify. She was just trying to do this as fast as possible to basically get it over with, because really what she wanted to do was be intimate with Sean Combs. But weren't there times where she was like tired, she was sick, and he kept pushing her through it?
She explained that on the stand, and getting also pretty emotional, where she recalled either just experiencing a large amount of pain or just being very tired, because again, these aren't like quick sessions, nothing like that. These are hour-long sessions, day-long sessions, where she would tell her partner, that being Diddy or Sean Combs, that she was just exhausted from it, and that there was one instance specifically where she threw up after having sex, I think, with a couple of men, and that she just wanted to stop, but he kept pushing her to keep going and going, according to her testimony. She even recalled that she would get back pain or neck pain and shoulder pain, and kind of similar to Cassie's testimony, she experienced UTIs, urinary tract infections, about every week. She also experienced yeast infections from these hotel nights, and she said that she would still complete the nights, again similar to Cassie's testimony, while still having a urinary tract infection, and explained that it was just very painful, and that her pelvic area also experienced a lot of pain. And she said she didn't want to indicate negativity as far as why she just didn't tell him that she was experiencing this type of pain, but it seemed like from her standpoint, I think one thing that she's really kind of been driving a point during her testimony so far is that she felt compelled to do this because that's what he wanted, that's what turned him on, that's what made him happy, and she just didn't want to make him unhappy. So she did everything, even when she was feeling pain, even when she was experiencing injuries, even when she would throw up after just a sex session, that she just kept on going because that's what made him happy.
And I know there was another episode where she says she even got sick. She threw up and basically was like, allegedly Combs basically said to her, okay, good, now you're ready for the next guy, you're ready for the third guy. And, you know, I think it was interesting because I remember I read that she was asked, do you know how many times you basically told him that you didn't want to do these? And it's one thing to vocalize it, it's another thing to have the text messages. I understand there were a lot of text messages that were read that arguably were used to show she was vocalizing she did not want to be a part of this, right? What were the substance of these text messages?
So we did see a lot of text messages, especially towards the end of the day. So, for example, we didn't see because they are not showing the exhibits while Jane is testifying, but we did hear about one text message from November 22nd of 2021 where Jane was saying, I'm definitely feeling some type of way because she saw Diddy with another woman, saw this through their Instagram stories. I guess Diddy and this other woman were at his gym, at his studio, and Jane says, I was jealous and felt mistreated while he was giving this woman quality time that she was asking for. At this point, she says that, and again, this is pretty early on into their relationship, where she was explaining that she just kind of felt used and only used particularly for these hotel nights. So Jane was under the guise that another man would be around them and that she didn't want this. She just wanted quality time with Sean Combs, but instead always another man was brought, and that normally being an entertainer or an escort. And so Jane in one text says, you just wanted a Dawn and a Sly moment. Dawn being one of the escorts, Sly being another name or the kind of stage name that Cabral uses, another man that was used during these hotel nights. Jane said to Sean Combs, I see what I'm turning into in your eyes. And then she also told him, I need a breather and a break from you. I hope you two have a great Thanksgiving. This doesn't make me feel good at all. And again, always paraphrasing because these notes or these text messages go by so fast. And then we see another exhibit where she's sending, it's a voice note from Diddy to Jane where she's like, so she asked me to work out. She just came back to work. He said, I told you have one more time to do this. And then we saw more text exhibits where Jane says, I don't even effing care who you're with. You say that you miss me and you want to see me, but you're lying. You just want me for hotel SHIT. She said she felt like she was the one who had to take it all on. And by take it all on, it was the one who was being the one who an escort was on top of her body and doing things to her specifically, that she was kind of having to carry the brunt of just these hotel nights as opposed to Diddy in a way who just kind of got pleasure from this. And so Jane also said in a text message, it's not me you miss or want. And then we see another text exhibit, this one from February 5th of 2022, where Jane says, baby, should I wear white or black dress? Diddy says black. Jane and Diddy were getting ready for her birthday and she just wanted to hang out, but ended up at a hotel night with Leo. Jane was explaining during this text message that she was really high, she was in love with her partner, so she was okay with this escort or entertainer named Leo kind of impeding on her birthday. We see another text message from just a couple of days later on February 11th of 2022 where Jane says that Diddy began dating another woman. It was heartbreaking for her, and that she saw that Diddy was celebrating this woman's birthday after he just spent her birthday with her. And Jane told Sean Combs, "I don't know how we'll make it out of this. I don't know if I'll ever do another hotel night with you." Then we see some notes from months later, those being on November 26th of 2022, where Jane says, "I've been waiting for you to do what you promised me. We both deserve love, and I don't feel it. I don't want to do drugs for days and days. The freaky wild desires in hotel rooms with you." We see another exhibit of a note, and these are notes that Jane is kind of taking on her phone, and they're kind of like diary entries, as the defense kind of pointed out, outside the presence of the jury. But she would sometimes send these notes, or also kind of like diary entries, and send them to Sean Combs. And so we saw another note from December 12th of 2022, and Jane, always paraphrasing here, Jane saying something along the lines of, "But for what? You took another girl on a date. You wanted to do hotel nights for debauchery. You want me to put you to bed. You have me locked in a hotel room. I'm done being used by you." And she explained that it was really hurtful to see Sean Combs do other things for other women that she wanted to do. She kind of felt like she was just being used for these particular nights, and if she wasn't used for these particular nights, then somehow, some way, another man would be brought. And so we're seeing photo exhibits, or not we're seeing photo exhibits because we can't see photo exhibits, but we're hearing about these exhibits where you hear photos about Jane and Diddy for her birthday. Then you see some texts from February 11th and 12th of 2023 where Jane is saying, "Why'd you lie to me?" Diddy left her in a room and then went on a private trip with another girl that he was dating. And Jane, getting really emotional while on the witness stand, is saying things like this broke her heart, that she felt left at these hotel rooms. And then you see more messages where Jane is saying, "It felt like you used me to get off, then you go on a trip. I couldn't get out of this constant movie." And she felt like these constant movies that she was talking about were just her having to go through these hotel nights day in and out, it felt like, from her perspective. And then Jane says, "You knew how tired I was after being with 3 men in one of these hotel nights." And then she went and saw that Diddy was on a trip with another woman, and it was to the only place that she even really wanted to go, and that was back to Turks and Caicos, where they had this really lovely trip, according to her, when they were in the beginning of their relationship. But then it seemed like a place that she wanted to go back to, and she wanted to go back to it with Diddy specifically, and only those two. However, it seemed like from Jane, she was really upset and heartbroken, according to her, that he was going on the one place that she wanted to go to, back with her then boyfriend, and he was there with another woman. And so Diddy had responded, "Well, let's not do this anymore. He's tired. I'm tired of you throwing sex in my face. Let's just be friends." And again, Jane's getting pretty emotional during this and throughout other parts of her testimony. And then Diddy had texted her hello and good morning after their brief breakup, and that she said she didn't respond for nearly 2 weeks. So it seems like from her end, and I think what the government was trying to do was really kind of show that she, one, cared for him, and I think she's kind of making that pretty obvious while on the witness stand, but also that it seemed like that she was only used for one particular thing. And so it's going to depend on the jury whether or not they believe that kind of goes to sex trafficking, forced fraud, or coercion, but it's up to them to make that decision.
Yeah, either it's a toxic relationship, or what the prosecution is hoping to say, he was using manipulation, deceit, lies to induce her to engage in sexual acts with sex workers. And one of the things that they kept focusing on multiple times throughout the testimony today, it's almost like they had to keep reminding the jury, he's paying for your rent, right? He's paying for your rent, right? He's paying for your rent. Didn't they mention that multiple times about him paying for her rent or paying for things for her? Because if you're using financial control to induce somebody to engage in sex acts, similar to what they said with Cassie, that felt like what was going on there. Am I wrong that they kept mentioning? And by the way, I could be completely wrong about this. Did they say that he's still paying her rent, or am I totally off about that?
Not totally off. I think that was kind of one of the shockers from the testimony today, but I do want to kind of go back just a little bit because it all kind of fell under the umbrella of this love contract where it's kind of like a gentleman's agreement between Jane and Sean Combs, where he would give her a monthly allowance, and that monthly allowance was $10,000 a month. Now, initially she said that she asked for $15,000 a month, which is, again, this is a month, everyone. This isn't just every few months. It's like every single month. But guess how much her rent is? It is $10,000, which is a lot of money. And Jane said that she used the budget or the allowance for her rent because that total is the entire rent. But yeah, she had said, Jesse, that she had a contract for 2 years. And so they made this love contract with one another in March of 2023, even though we're in May of 2025. She said that Diddy still pays her rent. And I think that's pretty notable given that he is still behind bars at MDC Brooklyn and probably paying a lot of money to attorneys right now, given that he's on a trial he's on his criminal trial right now. But as far as Jane's explanation of it, she said that she wanted him to match the time that we had already spent in her relationship. So she was explaining that they were already in their relationship for about a 2-year period. All the time that she had spent with these escorts, doing these hotel nights, she just wanted, I think, that time and that money back, more certainly. And so I'm surprised that she said that this contract that they had with one another was for 2 years, because if you're looking at the date of when they kind of agreed upon this, they passed the 2-year mark. So I'm curious to know why he is still continuing to pay her rent. But it did seem like the prosecution was saying that it wasn't just the rent that he paid for, that Diddy also didn't like her teeth, and so he ended up paying for her to get new veneers, and that he gave her money for the furniture, and that she ended up opening 3 credit cards. She went into debt. And so maybe that also kind of plays into that there was a kind of a financial gain or aspect from this, but I don't know if it'll work better for the defense or for the government at this point.
Yeah, right. So if you're talking about a commercial, something of value that's promised or given, but also if you read from the indictment, it's like he controlled their financial well-being, he controlled their physical appearance. You know, control's a big aspect when we talk about sex trafficking. By the way, you mentioned an audio recording. There were 2 audio recordings that were played for the jury and for the gallery?
So we did hear some audio notes, and these audio notes were from the defendant himself, that being Diddy. So I'm curious to know how the jury kind of interpreted these audio notes, mainly because when Diddy's inside that courtroom, while yes, he was kind of looking into the jurors, we don't hear from him very much. And so while he's sitting at the defense table in his sweaters, his undershirts, his slacks, I'm wondering how they thought listening to these audio messages, because we don't hear from him vocally while the trial is going on. And so we heard one audio note from Diddy where he says, "I'm not going to be playing these games with you. I don't have time for these games. Get on your job. I was trying not to leave this message. Ain't no threat. I can't do this with you every time you're upset. I'm going to disappear on you and you'll have a rude awakening." And so as far as the get on your job, Jane was testifying that she believed that he had meant get on your jobs as far as doing these hotel nights. As far as her being in for a rude awakening, she thought that meant that he would take things away from her. Those things being the rent that he paid for her, the roof over her head that she lives it was a place that she lives at with her child. And so we see another audio note. But let me just kind of go back a little bit, where Jane was saying that it felt really cold getting this. She thought that Diddy was going to cut her off. And then Diddy wrote in a text message after sending this audio note, "Get back to loving me now, LOL." Always paraphrasing here. He said a little bit more at the beginning of that. And then Jane responded, "You've been making these feel transactional." And Jane said again that Diddy brought up her rent and she felt like it was a guilt trip kind of feeling getting these types of messages from him. Then we hear another audio note where Diddy is saying, "You don't know how to move on. My tone is like this because I'm just waking up." And that, to Jane's point, it was another kind of instance where Diddy was threatening to take her rent away and kind of leave her in a position where she would either have to carry that $10,000 a month rent or have to find another place to live. Because if the man that is paying your rent is kind of telling you he's not going to be, I feel like she was kind of a little bit concerned about that from her end.
I want to talk also about now the weaker parts of her testimony when it comes to sex trafficking. Because the big question is, was it properly communicated, the lack of consent, or the alleged or the perceived lack of consent? I have to tell you, there were parts of it that I'm not entirely sure. It wasn't as if, at least this point in the testimony, that, he grabbed her by the hair and threw her back in the room after she said no, or he directly threatened her. What were some of the parts of her testimony that you said, that might be a problem. That might be something that's exploited by the defense. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think one of the instances that might kind of tie into the RICO was just the fact that the assistants set up these hotel nights. There was one picture that we didn't see, but we heard about it from Jane's description, where she's here in New York City, or I think it might have been Los Angeles, one of the two cities, that she was waiting outside of the hotel room, waiting for Diddy, and that the assistants were up in the hotel and that they were getting the room ready. So in the photograph, according to her description of it, because unfortunately we can't see these exhibits, she was saying that you could see the red lights, and these were normally the lighting that they would use during these hotel nights or debauchery nights, that sort. And then there was another instance where Jane was explaining some of the exhibit photos that only she could see, only the jury could see, where there was a person who was Diddy's assistant, and his name was Brendan, and that Brendan would bring pills and bottles, and then that Jane would see cocaine, she would see ecstasy, and that she explained that security would also get drugs if they ran out of drugs. And I think one interesting thing is that Jane carried drugs for Diddy twice. She says in 2022 from Los Angeles to Miami, Diddy had told her something like, he said if I could pick up a package before the flight. But she also spoke to Christina Koram about this package over the phone, and she said that Christina Koram said, hey, just come, I'll have security give it to you. Jane had testified that Christina had told her, it's fine, I do it all the time. And I thought that was kind of an interesting point. She being Jane was explaining that this package was wrapped in a white envelope. She put it in her luggage. She checked the bag at the airport, like we all do, maybe just without the drugs. But when we go visit the airport, and she said when she had landed, when she saw Diddy, that she gave him the drugs at his Miami home in the bathroom, and that these pills were ecstasy. And so I think maybe as far as RICO goes, I think they're really kind of trying to build into that, even though we're not hearing as much about the assistants as we might have done when Cassie was testifying. I think they are kind of laying out some puzzle pieces here and there as far as just what roles the assistants, whether it be Brendan, whether it be another assistant, whether it even be Christina Koram, that they also kind of played a role in either helping Jane get drugs over to Diddy if she was across the country, or just setting up these hotel nights, knowing what was gonna go down at these particular places.
No, I actually think that might help the prosecution, right? If they're trying to prove maybe predicate underlying crimes of, let's say, drug offenses, and they're talking about transporting drugs across state lines, and you're having Sean Combs' inner circle do it, that might help racketeering. And the more they talk about the assistants and the team, and I still believe Christina Koram's going to testify. I don't know for sure, but I have to imagine that she will. But in terms of sex trafficking, and in terms of the idea of a lack of consent, there were certain parts where it seemed to me that, she was expressing her dissatisfaction with certain sex workers, or maybe she was on her period, and she basically expressed this to Combs. He didn't necessarily force her to continue having sex in those episodes, right? I mean, if we're talking about a lack of consent and forcing her to do it, weren't there moments that seemed not great for the prosecution?
So we heard about a number of exhibits where these escorts' photographs were shown to the jury and obviously shown to the witness, that being Jane. And so there was one exhibit where it was Dawn the escort, and that she and Diddy had used them up until August of 2024, and that's notably a month before his arrest. There was Paul the escort, and she had been using him from 2021 up until the last time, and that being July of 2024. That he was a personal trainer, he trained Diddy, but he also worked for Cowboys for Angels. You saw him in places like Los Angeles and Miami and Turks and Caicos. There's Leo the escort, met him in 2022 on her birthday, saw him up until 2023. They used him every so often. And another escort named Michael. But there was one escort who was unnamed, where we had kind of been alluding to him a little bit, and he's the one that Jane was explaining that she was immediately repulsed by him. He was really sweaty, he smelled, she was hesitant with him. She said she tried to make it work, she tried to seduce him, she tried to make an attraction happen, but he was just sweating so much, according to her testimony, that she was just kind of throwing looks at her partner, and her partner being Sean Combs, and she was trying to avoid performing oral sex on this unnamed escort. She said she told Diddy that she wasn't feeling it, so Diddy and Jane had sex while the escort was there, and he was kind of hovering over her, according to her testimony, and staring at her, and that Diddy finally excused the man. But Diddy came up with a plan B where he brought in another escort in place of this man that repulsed Jane, and that person was Paul. And so there were times she was explaining that she didn't want to do the hotel night. So she had said that there was one night that she and Diddy were bickering because she didn't want to do the nights anymore, and that Diddy said, well, you don't have to do it anymore. And Jane said that she didn't believe that he really meant that. So she went back to the hotel room. Diddy gave her ecstasy, and then an escort came over, a sex worker came over, and Jane said that she just couldn't do it with this man, but she wanted to make it up to Diddy. And so she later called another escort, and that escort being Cabral, and she said, at this point in my relationship, she just knew what Diddy wanted. But I think as far as maybe a juror is concerned, that could be a little confusing, where it's like, okay, is it sex trafficking, or are you just doing what your partner at the time or partner is just kind of wanting as far as his own sexual desires? Is it really non-consensual? I think that's kind of a moment that I personally was trying to hear about, where she was just like, this is non-consensual. I didn't give my permission for this to happen. But it seemed like from her testimony that we've heard so far, there hasn't been an instance that I can recall of her actually just being like, this is non-consensual from what I've heard so far. But then she said, as far as all the escorts that were shown to the witness and the jurors, that they weren't the only escorts that were used. She said that there was one man who was African American. He was an actor or a singer. They met twice at a hotel in LA. There was a Spanish man met in 2022. She said he was a bit odd. There was a European man, met him in LA twice. But she said all the entertainers, minus Cabral and Anton, were people that Sean knew. He set up these entertainers, and that as far as her kind of role in setting up the entertainers or escorts or sex workers, that she really kind of focused on Cabral and Anton, as far as these were the two that she had reached out to personally, and said that she knew it was to be expected that she was going to continue doing this. And she kept saying, I knew he expected me to coordinate the nights where entertainers are expected. And so I think that part of the testimony could be interpreted in a very kind of confusing way, because again, to what we're kind of trying to dissect is whether or not this was non-consensual or against her will. But according to her, it seemed like she did participate in them, and she did them at kind of the hest of Diddy, but also because she wanted to in a way. And so it seemed like that's kind of where it was going, a little confusing at parts, for sure.
Yeah, and I know that if I read it correctly, there were times she said he was so sweet. You know, she talked about the love she had for him. She wanted to be in his arms. I mean, you're testifying against a criminal defendant accused of sex trafficking you, and I wonder if those could be problematic moments. By the way, how is the jury reacting to all this?
Yeah, so as far as the jury is reacting, I'm really kind of seeing no outwardly facial expressions from what I could see from them today, because I did get a little better view of them today, especially the second and third row. I think once the text messages started kind of getting a little more redundant and kept just going on and on and on, I did see some jurors kind of looking over to the clock, especially once we got to that 4 p.m. hour, 5 p.m. hour. People, I think, were kind of like, okay, it's almost the weekend, it's a Friday. But for the most part, I did see them still actively listening to the testimony. So they would either look at Maureen Comey, who was doing the questioning for the prosecution, or they would just look at Jane. And so there were some jurors who were doing kind of the back and forth. There were some who were just laser focused on Jane. But when those texts were coming out and when they were seeing those exhibit photos, I did see a lot of jurors really kind of intently looking at their screen, maybe just reading all the messages, because as fast as I try to write them, they really do go by pretty fast. And it was a lot of messages that they were sent. So I wonder what their thoughts were, kind of seeing this and seeing some of the more explicit photos and text messages that were sent from Diddy to Jane, or from Jane to Diddy, and even some of the messages that were sent to the escorts or entertainers too.
And how is Diddy behaving? Because we know he got into trouble yesterday for allegedly nodding at the jurors during a key piece of cross-examination of a prosecution witness. Was he animated today? I heard reporting that he might have been animated with his attorneys, but how was he responding to the jury? And did he seem quite involved in today's testimony?
I feel like at one point today, I was kind of looking for maybe when the jury was entering that he would just kind of look over. But from what I could see, because I made sure to watch his reaction when they had entered the room and even left the courtroom today, just to see like what his body language was like. And it seemed like from him, from what I could see of him, that he was really looking at the judge at this point. But I will say, as far as Jane taking the witness stand, I did see him turn back in his chair, kind of look at her walk to the witness stand. And this is before the jury enters the courtroom. And so what they normally do is bring out the witness and then they'll bring out the jury after that. And so it seemed like from Diddy's perspective, I think what the judge told him yesterday really kind of resonated with him, because I don't think he wanted to get on the judge's bad side 2 days in a row. And so from what I could see of him and just the moments that the jury was entering and leaving the courtroom, it was just like, okay, don't look at them, don't make contact with them, and don't nod at them either.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be surprised. The judge basically said to his counsel, you know, I've seen him nodding. So any attempt to influence the jury, big no-no, particularly for a guy who's accused of intimidating alleged victims and witnesses and associates. I mean, there is a concern there, but particularly, I mean, I wonder if Sean Combs was on a high yesterday because of the really what appeared to be successful cross-examination of Brianna Bangolin. You know, he might have been feeling good about it and nodding towards them. So the judge basically said, I will give a limiting instruction next time to the jury that you won't like, maybe something along the lines of, jury, you might have seen the defendant nodding at you, communicating inappropriately to you, ignore it, it's not evidence. That probably doesn't look too good. Or it might even kick him out of the courtroom if it really does repeat, which he could potentially do. Yeah. So he's not doing that. By the way, was he animated with his attorneys? I saw some reporting about that, maybe during Jane's testimony.
There were times, like, for example, when all the text messages were shown, the photographs were shown, you could see him kind of like get up on where he sits at the defense table and really kind of, one, put his glasses on, but also really look at these text messages. I did see him at points just really kind of listening to what Jane said while she was on the witness stand, but also passing notes to his attorneys. We believe that it's going to be Tenny Garagos, who's the one cross-examining Jane whenever that time comes next week. But I did see him kind of whispering things to her, jotting notes down, passing them off to her. And so he is kind of animated in his own way, but I think it's because he's also an active participant in his defense. I don't think there's ever a point that I've seen so far since this trial began where he's really just sits the entire day and doesn't pass any type of notes. He really is just kind of laser focused on his defense and doing what he can from what the judge orders him to do at that defense table.
Elizabeth, would I be wrong that the prosecution was maybe successful today with her testimony in proving transportation to engage in prostitution, namely that Combs or his associates transported people, so sex workers, performers, and alleged victims for the purposes of prostitution, for sex work? Was there a lot of testimony about that today, whether it was assistants, whether it was even Jane, him, you know, the flow of cash, things like that? Was there a lot about the prostitution and the transportation angle?
So there was a lot of discussion about transportation to engage in prostitution, specifically when it comes to Jane. So, for example, there was one escort that they used, and this was the first escort that Jane even booked herself, and this was a man named Cabral, but he was someone who was from Atlanta that they coordinated just his travel arrangements, and it would either be Jane coordinating his travel arrangements, then she'd be reimbursed by Diddy, or it'd be Diddy's travel agent, because again, this is a man who's very wealthy. Of course, he would have his own travel agent, but I think the government is really kind of placing, again, those puzzle pieces to be like, oh, okay, you guys had flown him out from Atlanta to Los Angeles to attend these hotel nights. There was another time where that they had booked Cabral from Atlanta to New York to engage in these hotel nights. She was explaining that there were escorts used in Miami and New York and Los Angeles, all the way to Turks and Caicos. So as far as their Turks and Caicos trip, this was a trip that Jane really wanted to go on because this kind of reminded her of the first lovely trip that the two had together at the beginning of their relationship. And she thought that this was just going to be a trip for her and Diddy to reconnect, really just kind of get the love back that they had that type of trip. And she was explaining that she thought that it would, again, just be the two of them, but then it wasn't, that another escort had ended up coming and that this escort was actually Paul. And so she was explaining that after the first day in this particular trip to Turks and Caicos, that Paul, the escort, had come and that they had this 24-hour, one-day hotel night with him. And that she said that Jane was actually happy about this. After it was over, she had explained, she says that she was just excited to cuddle with Sean Sean Combs. And Diddy had asked her, do you have more in you? And then he then invited Paul over to their villa, and then Diddy gave her this 2-heart bracelet. She says that Paul was really nice, but she just didn't want to have sex with him. But she says that she remembers that night was super painful. She couldn't have sex anymore because she was extremely sore, especially after the 4th round that they were doing this. Diddy gave her more lubricants, and Diddy said something along the lines of, oh, you can't take any more D. And then Jane ended up throwing this bracelet that she had and said, you only want me here to suck D. And Jane was saying that she walked out. Diddy followed her and said something along the lines to her as, how could you do that in front of Paul? Diddy told her to apologize to Paul, and that she ended up doing that because she said, I did make a scene, and she ended up apologizing to him. However, Diddy didn't apologize to Jane for what he had done. And so it seems like, as far as just the arguments of transportation to engage in prostitution, I think Maureen Comey does kind of an excellent job of being like, okay, well, where did this occur? Where did you fly him out to? At what time? And who booked the travel arrangement? How were you reimbursed, if you were reimbursed? And so I think they're kind of, again, laying that foundation enough where it's kind of like, okay, you really do kind of, from the government's perspective, it seems like they do have a strong case, especially for the transportation to engage in prostitution, especially because they're in so many various cities. And then they even go outside of the country and internationally too.
Yeah, and also there was discussion of cash and cash on hand and cash with the assistants and paying. So yeah, I think that is still a very, very tough charge, or 2 charges for Sean Combs' defense team to argue against, but we'll see. Look, I will tell you this much also. This was not an easy day for this jury. We didn't even get into the graphic details, the specifics of these sexual encounters, because it's not necessary to I mean, just use your imagination if you want about what he was directing and what was going on. I'm not going to get into it. I'm not going to get into it here. It's pretty disgusting, to say the least. You want to read about it? Go read about it. But I do understand that there was some sexually explicit material that was shown to the jury.
Yeah, and so Maureen Comey kind of backed it up just a little bit, where she would ask Jane about whether or not Diddy recorded these hotel nights. And Jane explained that Diddy would record these nights on his iPhone, that Diddy would give directions during these hotel nights, similar to Cassie's testimony, where Diddy would say stuff along the lines of, use baby oil, have this man stand for this amount of time, and that she would stay in the same position because Sean told her to, and that Sean or Diddy had never recorded her sober. She was always on ecstasy. She was on Molly. Jane was saying that she acted like she enjoyed it, but she said she just wanted to put on a good show for Sean. And she was asked, why were you role playing? And she said, because that's what Sean liked. And so Jane said that in some of these sexually explicit videos and recordings that she would laugh because she was just so high on different drugs. And so the jury was able to see a number of exhibits of this sexually explicit material, where it was Jane and Dawn, for example, Dawn and Escort, that was during a hotel night. It was Jane and Cabral during a hotel night, Jane and Paul during a hotel night, Jane and Cabral again during a hotel night, Jane and Paul again during a hotel night. Cabral and Paul do sound very similar, but they are two different men. It was Jane and Leo, Jane and Dawn, Jane and Anton, and then Cabral and Paul were both used in different periods. And so she said that as far as just the exhibits that were shown, while the images that the jury did see were specifically Jane and the other escort, she said that Diddy was present through all of this. So there wasn't any video that was shown as far as just kind of any of the hotel nights being shown just from like playing 30 seconds of or any of that. It was really just screenshots that were shown. That will go back with the jury as far as evidence is concerned. And so they were in for a lot today, and they did see a lot of exhibits today. But we, inside the gallery, we are not able to see those images, so we don't know exactly what's depicted on them beyond who the two are in the photo.
Not easy sitting on this jury, and I understand the testimony is going to continue. The defense hasn't even had an opportunity to cross-examine her yet, but we already picked upon some points that they may focus on as well. Elizabeth Millner, great reporting today, great reporting this week. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.